The Democrats and Republican voters are realizing that they have more in common with each other than they do with their parties that represent the elites. This is a new wave of American politics where populists from the left and populists from the right realize that they have more in common than they do disagree about.
A couple of weeks ago, Tim Poole appeared on Fox News, and the host praised him for taking on the mainstream media.
It seems to me that you and people like you have a critical role in shifting this conversation to what really matters. What are some of the ways that people who may not have your platform, but who want to try to shift that narrative, as you say, how can they get involved? How can they share information that cuts across and actually highlights the things that matter, as opposed to going on with this corporate narrative?
Our boy Kyle responded to this in a way I found odd.
I mean, the host literally argues, corporate media isn't talking about what matters. Again, dude, that's you. You're corporate media. And you're right, you're not talking about what matters, especially on Fox News, you're not talking about what matters. But it's just so funny that, like, they do this weird thing where they posture like they're anti-establishment. When you are the heart of the establishment, you're in the belly of the beast. That's where you are.
It's not that he's wrong. Fox News is part of the mainstream media, though I should note that they are ideologically distinct from most of it. That's not what I found odd, though. It's that Kyle was taken aback by this, given the company he keeps. As I'm guessing most of you know, Kyle co-hosts a podcast with Crystal Ball. She, of course, hosts a show with Sagar and Jati called Breaking Points. The reason why I say Kyle's reaction was odd is because Crystal and Sagar used to be on Rising, which is a show on The Hill's YouTube channel. The Hill is undeniably part of the corporate DC establishment mainstream media, and yet these two sanctimonious worms regularly railed against corporate media as if they somehow weren't a part of it.
Of course, the biggest news out of the whole thing, which is again just completely ignored by the corporate media, is that Biden said he's probably not going to take troops out of Afghanistan on May 1st, but said, quote, "I can't imagine that they'll be here in 2022.
Kyle not only knew this, but he also routinely praised their work as if it was part of the alternative media. I know I've brought this up before, but I can't get past the audacity of it. It's like when Brett Keane made fun of The Amazing Atheist for being fat. If you get the reference, you get the reference. This is a minor annoyance in the grand scheme of things, though. And it is in the past at this point. To their credit, and I mean this with complete sincerity, Crystal and Sagar decided several months ago that they would live their principles and went independent. This must not have been an easy decision, and I'm sure it was enormously risky financially and professionally. I genuinely admire their courage. That said, their new show might be even worse than Rising. One of the more controversial opinions I've expressed on this channel is that new media really isn't that much better than old media, if it's better at all. It's not that a lot of new media criticisms of mainstream media aren't correct. I'd say most of them are. It's that new media is guilty of so many of them as well. Fundamentally, I believe that new media faces essentially the same set of incentives that legacy media does. So the actual content they produce isn't going to deviate in a terribly significant way. New media personalities often talk about how corporate ownership can affect the news content because the news people may not want to agitate their employer's parent company, or that the people who work there are in some way pre-selected and vetted such that they won't even consider doing it. While I think some may overstate this at times, I don't dispute that it certainly can happen. The thing is, a new media outlet that is entirely funded by its viewers, like Secular Talk or Breaking Points, is not free from financial pressures either. If you say something that your audience doesn't like, that's potentially money out of your pocket as well. I know for a fact that this affects a lot of YouTubers. I don't make much money from YouTube, but I'd be lying if I told you that audience opinion never crossed my mind when making a video. I'm not suggesting that all YouTubers are cowards, though I'm sure some of them are. I'm saying that an audience can shape the way someone speaks in the same way corporate shareholders or billionaire patrons can. Perhaps an audience drives content less than big money interests, but it does have an impact. As far as Crystal and Sagar are concerned, their content hasn't changed in a significant way since they went independent. They still offer up the same sloppy, populist garbage that they always have. Just about every flaw they point out in the mainstream media, they are guilty of themselves. They just don't have someone scrutinizing them the way they scrutinize CNN or the New York Times. And that's why I'm here. When someone in the mainstream media smears someone in the new media space, Crystal and Sagar usually rise to the defense of the target.
Unfortunately, that is what the mainstream media chose to do when it came to COVID and ivermectin. They welded both their hate for Rogan for being more popular than them with a deep and undying hatred of anybody who advances the alternative view of COVID treatment.
Which is fine. It's never fair to misrepresent someone's views, even if you disagree with them or don't like them. The thing is, Crystal and Sagar do this all the time in the opposite direction. Here's Sagar talking about my favorite living writer, Kevin D. Williamson.
Kevin has always had this problem. He's the guy who said, let the white working class die. He's like, well, what is so great about the working class anyway? They should all just move, like their towns
just
suck.
Like upfront about his elitism and contemptuousness.
Look, he's a deeply libertarian guy, and this is where it all leads to, which is that you devalue what makes human experience actually worth being human, and you make everything people into economic units.
Williamson was accused of this during the 2016 presidential election, based on an article he wrote titled Chaos in the Family, Chaos in the State: The White Working Class's Dysfunction. It's a pretty long article, so obviously I won't be reading the whole thing here. That said, the link to it is in the description box below. I highly recommend you read it for yourself. The portion of the article that I will be reading is lengthy in its own right. I'm going to go over it because it is relevant to things I want to discuss beyond the accusations against the author. In this piece, Williamson is responding in part to Michael Brendan Dougherty, a conservative populist and fellow National Review writer who once appeared on Breaking Points for a long-form interview. In 2016, Dougherty argued that conservative elites, and elites generally, have failed the white working class and are directly responsible for much of the malaise and suffering we see in parts of the country, like Appalachia and the Rust Belt. This is exactly the sort of thing you'd hear on Breaking Points. Regarding this elite bashing, Williamson wrote, "It is also immoral. It is immoral because it perpetuates a lie. That the white working class that finds itself attracted to Trump has been victimized by outside forces. It hasn't. The white middle class may like the idea of Trump as a giant pulsing humanoid middle finger held up in the face of the cathedral. They may sing hymns to Trump the Destroyer and whisper darkly about globalists and, odious, stupid term, the establishment. But nobody did this to them. They failed themselves. If you spend time in hardscrabble, white upstate New York, or eastern Kentucky, or my own native West Texas, and you take an honest look at the welfare dependency, the drug and alcohol addiction, the family anarchy, which is to say, the whelping of human children with all the respect and wisdom of a stray dog, you will come to an awful realization. It wasn't Beijing. It wasn't even Washington, as bad as Washington can be. It wasn't immigrants from Mexico, excessive and problematic as our current immigration levels are. It wasn't any of that. Nothing happened to them. There wasn't some awful disaster. There wasn't a war or a famine or a plague or a foreign occupation. Even the economic changes of the past few decades do very little to explain the dysfunction and negligence, and the incomprehensible malice of poor white America. So the gypsum business in Garbutt ain't what it used to be. There is more to life in the 21st century than wallboard and cheap sentimentality about how the man closed the factories down. The truth about these dysfunctional, downscale communities is that they deserve to die. Economically, they are negative assets. Morally, they are indefensible. Forget all your cheap theatrical Bruce Springsteen crap. Forget your sanctimony about struggling Rust Belt factory towns, and your conspiracy theories about the wily Orientals stealing our jobs. Forget your goddamn gypsum. And if he has a problem with that, forget Ed Burke, too. The white American underclass is enthralled to a vicious, selfish culture whose main products are misery and used heroin needles. Donald Trump's speeches make them feel good. So does Oxycontin. What they need isn't analgesics, literal or political. They need real opportunity, which means that they need real change, which means they need a U-Haul. If you want to live, get out of Garbutt. Williamson does not want the white working class to die. He wants these dysfunctional communities that many of them currently reside in to die. These places have no inherent value in and of themselves, and the best way for the current residents to survive and rise above their current standard of living is to leave these sinkholes of malaise behind and relocate to a place where there is actual opportunity. From what I know about Williamson's own life is that he basically did exactly that. I don't think Sagar was being malicious when he accused Williamson of wanting the white working class to die. I think he was just being lazy. As I said earlier, this is a smear of Williamson that was going around in 2016, and Sagar just picked it up uncritically without bothering to check if it was actually true. In other words, he did exactly the sort of thing that would inspire one of his stupid monologues had the mainstream media done it to a new media personality. More importantly, I want to talk about Williamson's response to populist narratives. In his anti-Williamson screed, Sagar also pushed back against the idea that Americans should move.
This leads to Ben Shapiro thought, where it's like, why doesn't everybody just move, right? Like, what's so great about living in your hometown?
He made that case as
I'm
well.
like, actually, a lot of people really like living in their hometown
And
near their
community
mom.
is supposed to be a really conservative value.
Once
Like
again,
community
yeah.
institutions and family and rootedness are supposed to be conservative values.
I'm actually sympathetic to what Sagar says here. Several years ago, I moved for a new job. I currently live away from my hometown, my family, and the people I care about, and I long to move back. Unfortunately, there's this thing called adulthood that involves making difficult decisions that have trade-offs. Again, I moved for work, as people often do, and hopefully I will move back eventually. But that's on me. This was not the result of some policy failure or some scheme cooked up by elites, and there is no nefarious plot keeping me from my family. Life sometimes involves making difficult decisions that keep us from where we want to be. Crystal and Sagar are effective populist rhetoricians. That's one of the big reasons why they're so popular. And it's why I think they're actually the worst political channel on YouTube. Telling people that they're the victims of some conspiracy hatched by elites is an appealing idea. My Twitter friend Coleman Mulkerin put it nicely when he said that these people talk of elites as if they're these cruel Greek gods watching the rest of us from Mount Olympus, using us as their playthings. Sounds awful, but there is a silver lining. Make the correct propitiations and sacrifices to the gods, and they will be kind to you. Simple problems lend themselves to easy solutions. If it's true, as Crystal and Sagar suggest, that elites are responsible for the bad things that happen to this country, then we just need to bring these people under the discipline of democratic rule, and voila. Problem solved. The sobering reality is that, actually, we have complicated problems that lend themselves not to simple solutions, but significant trade-offs. And this is where they really fall short. Sometimes they do take a deep dive into the issues, all the while smugly patting themselves on the back for how they focus on substance, unlike the mainstream media. Except when they do this, they usually faceplant and get even the most basic details wrong. They seem to always ignore or manipulate information to fit their narrative that elite's bad. A great example of this comes from our friend Sean over at the channel Actual Justice Warrior, where he broke down their analysis of the BlackRock rental home purchases.
And anytime that you're selling this idea that you have the secret knowledge of the secret alliance against the secret elites that are secretly doing everything to you, you tend to wade into conspiracy territory. And that's why we're going to talk about, for our first video ever on Crystal and Sagar, their coverage of this BlackRock conspiracy scandal, where they get everything wrong because they didn't bother to do any research.
I highly recommend you watch it. The link is in the description box below. He demonstrates that they get just about everything wrong in that story. Unfortunately for these two and the viewers who take their analysis seriously, they basically do this on every issue they talk about. Let's take a quick look at a portion of a monologue Sagar did back when they were still on the Hill. Sagar was particularly proud of the segment where he did a deep dive into the current shortage of semiconductors in the United States.
And like with PPE and other critical things during the pandemic, we found out the hard way about our decision to offshore everything just to save a few dollars in the short term. We are in the middle of a semiconductor crisis in America. It's decades in the making, and it's the crisis that we face today. It's the story of America and its economy itself. Once upon a time, America was the world's leader in semiconductor manufacture. Much of the technology and intellectual property, it was developed right here on our shores. To put it in perspective, in 1990, 37% of the world's chips were manufactured right here. Today, it's 12%. We consume a hell of a lot more than 12% of the world's semiconductors. How did this happen? Because the people buying the semiconductors wanted cheaper ones, and Singapore, South Korea, China, and Taiwan were happy to oblige them. Not because they were doing it better than us, but because their governments massively subsidized the industry and undercut our company's ability to compete. The government here did not bat an eye. Just let the jobs and the capacity shift right overseas at the exact same moment that semiconductors became more essential than ever.
The video is titled A Story of How Elites Sold Us Out and Trump Did Nothing About It. The link to that monologue is in the description box below as well. so that you can see the entire thing in context if you want. Just like the BlackRock story, literally everything you heard in that portion of the monologue was wrong. In fact, basically the entire thing and their commentary afterward was wrong too. My favorite thing about protectionists is that they're oblivious to the fact that we've tried all their policy ideas, and they've failed predictably and disastrously. This is even true with semiconductors, which the US federal government has been subsidizing since the Reagan administration. Contrary to what you may have heard on Crystal and Sagar, there was no mythical time in American history when we embraced free market fundamentalism. I will be looking at the industrial policy regarding semiconductors, why it's a bad idea, and why it exacerbates the exact sort of political dysfunction these two are always whining about. But not today. This video is long enough already. Take care, guys, and I will see you soon.